Hello and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. From spring to fall, the uprisings in at least 3 Arab states are fast becoming vicious civil wars. Is the Arab awakening less about democracy promotion and more against a stifling status quo and police states? And what are the chances the Arab awakening will be hijacked by new strongmen and dictators? Crosstalk the uprisings in the Arab world, I'm joined by David Price Jones in Florence. He is senior editor of the National Review and author of Treason of the Heart, From Thomas Paine to Kim Philby. In Washington, we have Omar Badar. He is a political scientist and human rights activist. And in Austin, we cross to Alan Kuperman. He's an associate professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs of the University of Texas. All right, gentlemen, this is Crosstalk, and that means Crosstalk rules. In effect, you can jump in anytime you want. If I could go to David first in Florence, is the Arab awakening, as it's being called, turning into an Arab nightmare? As I started out the program, 3 of these countries that are undergoing social strife, it's turning into a vicious civil war, and democracy seems to be more of a distant ideal, if it ever was.
There are 2 sorts of people involved in this. There are the people who want power and the people who want freedom. And for the moment, the people who want power are gaining ground over the people who want freedom. And the people who want power have a lot of very unpleasant characteristics going for them. They're cruel, brutal people, and they hold on to power, and they're not going to give it up. And we see in one country after another that the people who want power have quite different character from the people who want freedom. And the people who want freedom are not characteristic thugs and brutes. They're standing up for themselves and for human rights and for a decent society. So things are not going too well. But I believe everything will turn on what happens in Syria. It's a standing example of how the people who want power are winning over the people who want freedom. But the game is not yet over in Syria.
Okay, Omar, in Washington, how would you react to that there? Is it a simple dichotomy like that? Go ahead.
I honestly, I think it would be perfectly legitimate to say that there has been a shift in mood. I mean, after the fall of Mubarak, I mean, that regime was so central to the old reigning order in the Middle East that its fall created this sense of euphoria and I think hyper-optimism. And it would be perfectly legitimate to say that the mood has changed significantly after the protracted cluster mess, to put it politely, in Libya, in Bahrain, in Syria, and in Yemen. I think people are just simply more grounded in reality now about the kind of cost it's going to take in time and blood to see this transformation through. But I still think that the general outlook is still positive. For me, the story in Syria is not so much the fact that there is this brutality, protracted brutality taking place, as much as it is that people are still taking to the streets despite of it, that far in. So I think the cat is out of the bag. People have lost their fear. This is the moment for the Middle East to change, and I don't think that anything can stop it. I think different regimes will be able to employ different tactics to delay that transformation. They can use brutality, they can use bribes, they can use exploit ethnic fears and what have you and things of that sort and blame foreign agents. And that will buy them some time in the meantime. But I think they will not be able to stop the transformation, generally speaking. Anybody who expected this to be quick and painless simply either does not understand how change occurs generally or does not understand the complexities of the Middle East.
Okay, Alan, if I can go to you in Austin. Last time you were on the program, we were discussing Libya, and you might want to jump in and mention that also in this program here. You know, are the rebels there, and now it's turned into a protracted civil war in Libya, is it all about democracy, or is it just about to get rid of Gaddafi and the Gaddafi family? And it has less to do with democracy than just gaining power.
Well, I think, Peter, there was a terrible naivete at the beginning of this Arab Spring in the rest of the international community. And they sort of saw this fairy tale where all the people were united against an evil dictator, and peacefully they would overthrow the dictator, and then we would have Jeffersonian democracy. And there were a lot of problems with that from the start. First of all, it's very, very different in a country that's divided along sectarian lines, ethnic lines, clan lines, tribe lines. In that sort of country where you get an attempt at overthrow, what you get is an ethnic civil war. Similarly, it's different whether it's a peaceful uprising or a violent uprising. In a violent uprising, you're going to get a terribly brutal response from the government, as we've seen in Libya. And third of all, not all the folks, even the peaceful folks, wanted to establish a Jeffersonian democracy. Some of them were Islamic radicals and just wanted to establish an Islamic state. If there was going to be a vote, it was going to be one man, one vote, one time. So I'm not surprised that this Arab Spring is turning into a very hot Arab summer and we're not seeing democracy. And I do not share the optimism of one or both of my colleagues today. I think that this is going to be bad for the people of those countries, and I think it's going to be certainly bad for the American national interest.
David, if I can go to you,
I'm surprised to find myself.
Go ahead, jump in.
Described I'm surprised to find myself described as an optimist after what I said. I think part of the trouble is that the people who want freedom want it, but don't know how to achieve it, and that's not very optimistic. If there was a civic society, if there were parties, if there were genuine representatives, if there was some form of real electoral system whereby you could have representation and accountability. But none of these things. What you actually have is a lot of good feeling on the street, but there's no way to institutionalize that good feeling. And therefore, I wonder really how Omar thinks it's going to happen.
Omar, that was Alan, but Omar, if I can go to you, isn't this really just about learning curves here in political technologies? Because ruling regimes that are oppressive, they've just learned how to deal with crowds more, how to deal with social networking. I mean, they've shown an amazing learning curve. I'm not going to say they're going to win, but they've learned how to deal with social dissent and protesting and all forms of protesting. And on the other side is that you have protesters that are learning new techniques also to challenge authority. So again, we're taking a lot of these really noble ideas out of the equation, and it's all about power, how to keep it or how to gain it.
Yeah, I think that certainly there was a learning curve. I think in Tunisia and Egypt, the governments were completely taken by surprise what had happened, and that put them at a disadvantage in terms of how to react to it, and that's where I think you saw the most significant transformation. I think other governments looking at this are learning the lessons. They're trying to avoid getting stuck in the same situation, which is why the resistance is going to be more significant. And again, how can you expect them not to resist to the extent that they are? I mean, their backs are against the wall. They see this wave of change. They've been frozen in time. They've had absolute power for many decades. That, yes, of course they're going to resist brutally to the extent that they have. But I still don't think that this will halt the Arab Spring, so to speak. I still think that people have genuinely lost their fear of their governments. I mean, I think this is for the first time that the equation has actually shifted, where the governments are the ones who are actually afraid of their people. People, I think, on a very personal level, are fed up with unaccountability, are fed up with the kind of lives they're living where there's very little political freedom. And in the broader sense, they look at the rest of the world moving forward, and they are refusing to continue being left behind. And I think that that movement, that moment in history, is not the kind of thing that these governments will ultimately be able to thwart. And I just want to emphasize one thing. When we say that this will ultimately be successful, this does not mean that every last autocrat is going to be unseated. I mean, you're talking, I think it was Nadim Khouri that put it yesterday in a televised debate this way. He said there's going to be a menu of change. But in some places, like in Egypt, you saw the decapitation of the regime, and you're seeing a more significant transformation from there. In other places, it's just going to be very substantive, substantial reform that alters the way the country is run. So I think the way to judge it, generally speaking, is that what you're seeing is a transition from people of the region being subjects to becoming citizens of their states. And I think that that transformation is going to follow through.
Again, that sort of sounds like a fairy tale to me, Peter. I mean,
Go ahead,
it's
jump in.
It's either going to be a very happy ending or a sort of happy ending. And in fact, in some places you're seeing very unhappy middles and probably even less happy endings. So in Syria, we see 1,000 people killed so far. In Libya, thousands of people killed so far, most of them probably after NATO intervened in that conflict. In Yemen, we see an incipient civil war. In Bahrain, we see an uprising that was really an ethnic uprising, and we see it absolutely brutally crushed with intervention from Saudi Arabia. So I don't really understand partners there, where Omar is seeing all of these very happy or sort of happy endings. We're seeing repression. We're seeing increased ethnic hostility. Now, look, of course, I would love to see democratization in countries that want to be democracies. But the question is how you get there. And you don't get there as the U.S. and NATO have done it in Libya by intervening militarily. And you don't get there, as some folks have tried, by trying to get revolutions overnight in ethnically divided society. In Bahrain, the Sunni power holders are not going to give power up overnight to the Shiites. And similarly in Syria, the Alawites are not going to give up power overnight.
Nobody's suggesting that it's overnight.
So
anybody who thought that this was going to happen overnight was simply naive about how change happens.
But that's my point. So President Obama gets up and says that Muammar Gaddafi has to step down and leave power. And now you get these calls. People are saying the same thing in Syria, that Assad has to step down and leave power. It's just not going to happen. If you insist on that, they will fight to the very last man.
Okay, David, I want you to jump in. Go ahead.
Go
ahead.
I wouldn't call Egypt a good example of transformation, the way that Omar proposed. It's been another military coup. Mubarak's colleagues are still in power. They own 60% or so of the economy. They're heavily invested in all Egyptian business. And really all they've done is throw out one of their own team. And they've taken over to write a constitution which may or may not make any change. It seems to me that all those people who were once protesting in Tahrir Square were betrayed. They made a lot of noise. And it didn't really affect the military regime. It's really run by a party of generals, as has been the case in Egypt since Nasser took over.
Okay. I certainly would not want to underplay the difficulty, the sort of like military rule that is taking place in Egypt right now and the kind of conditions that people are living under. There's no question that, we've seen a significant amount of repression happen after Mubarak was ousted. But what I see, I think it was Hussein Ibish that put it this way this morning in an article, where there's the beginning of a transition right now in which there would be meaningful power sharing moving forward, that perhaps the military would continue to be in charge of national security.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We have to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Arab awakening. Stay with RT.
Hungry for the full story? We've got it firsthand. The biggest issues get a human voice, face to face with the newsmakers on RT.
76 hours of intense fighting. 6,000 dead. A beachfront battlefield several kilometers long. And now there is only one person who cares.
You see, we are surrounded by garbage everywhere, but also there is shit on this beach, which of course is the most appropriate signification and symbol of everything that's wrong with our goddamn government, allowing not only garbage but shit to accumulate where so many guys died.
A new battle is going on. Will the history be protected? Return to Tarawa, the Leon Cooper story on RT.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the prospects for the Arab awakening. Alan, I'd like to go to you and maybe just switch gears a little bit. Let's take a look at Libya. It seems very likely it's only a matter of time that NATO will finally get rid of Mr. Gaddafi in Libya. And will that be called a success for democracy? Because it will be NATO's victory, quote unquote, and not the people's. And is that a precedent that should be set about how to bring democracy to the Arab world?
Well, I think you're right that if Gaddafi leaves, that NATO will declare this a successful humanitarian intervention, a successful democratization campaign. But it doesn't mean that either of those things is true. It's my contention, and I think it's clear from the facts, that this war in Libya would have ended months ago if not for the NATO intervention. And because of the NATO intervention, people have continued to die by the hundreds in Libya. And so what that means is that the intervention actually caused more harm than good. Secondly, will it lead to democratization? It doesn't appear so. Libya at this point seems to be divided regionally and along tribal lines, and so you've got a bifurcated Libya. How you're going to knit those two pieces of the country back together again, I don't really know. But I would suggest that the best way would be negotiation, not through military victory. So no, I don't think it will in fact be a success for humanitarian intervention or for democratization, and certainly not a model for other countries. And just to, more generally on this whole Arab Spring, Arab Summer thing, I think the point is that in many of these countries you have different factions. You have different political factions, ethnic factions, sectarian factions, and the answer, therefore, is a long-term evolution towards power sharing. That's the way to get everything you want. People safe, democracy, progress. And my concern is that the position of the international community has been for revolution, not evolution. They say Gaddafi has to leave, Assad has to leave, Saleh has to leave. And what you're seeing are the consequences on the street, which is incipient civil war or full-blown civil war. That's not good for democracy. That's not good for humanitarianism.
If I go to David in Florence here, Alan brings up a very good point. Is outside intervention, foreign intervention, and primarily Western intervention good for the Arab awakening, for bringing institutions that we all take for granted there after a huge neo-colonial project that the West had there for centuries? I mean, is the West playing a positive role, net positive role, or net negative role?
Well, that's a very good question, isn't it? I'm not sure how the intervention in Libya would have been solved. Surely the uprising that took place was an internal affair, an internal matter. How would that have been resolved if we let it run? I'm not actually in favor of the intervention in Libya. I think it produces a very strange paradox. Don't really understand why it's all right to go and knock off Gaddafi and not all right to go and knock off Assad. So on the whole, it seems to me that military intervention of that sort is not a good idea. I wasn't for it either, by the way, in Serbia. I don't think these things produce anything except damage, rage, and frustration. They don't lead to democracy. They can't lead to democracy. For instance, the Kosovo situation is unresolved, and I'm sure the Libyan situation is going to be unresolved for a long time to come. It may be that there's a Cyrenaica Tripolitania split, and there were two Libyas or something of that sort. But is that an improvement? I doubt it. All those borders are there for some reason. What are we doing about Syria? And why are we intervening in Libya and not in Syria? It's an unanswerable question. So I'm afraid that Alan is probably right.
It's not an unanswerable question. I mean, that's the thing.
And we're better not to do it.
Omar, jump in. Go right ahead.
I feel, look, if you're looking for moral consistency, you're going to be baffled for a very long time about the different policy and double standards that people employ in reacting to situations in different countries. I think the reason why there's no intervention in Syria is because if the Assad regime is knocked down by force, you run a very serious risk of a regional war that ends up involving Iran, Hezbollah, and Israel as well. So, the stakes are a bit higher over there. Now, just to backtrack a little bit about Libya, I agree that I'm generally speaking, the region is very iffy about the idea of foreign intervention, but I don't know how anybody can say with a straight face that the intervention to stop the Gaddafi forces from reaching Benghazi has ended up causing more deaths than had they let it happen. I think there was an emergency situation, and while I'm not in favor of intervention, generally speaking, I mean, you're talking about forces where Gaddafi is basically handing out Viagra and condoms to his men. And they're approaching the city that is sort of like the primary opposition stronghold. And what was going to happen there if this was allowed to happen? I mean, there is no... people should have no illusions about where this was going.
Unconfirmed allegations.
I knew you were going to jump in there, Alan. Go ahead. Go ahead. I suppose you'll stay with a straight face. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Everyone said that there was going to be this terrible bloodbath in Benghazi. And I traced it down, and it turns out it was a spokesman in Switzerland that decided there was going to be a bloodbath in Benghazi. It wasn't people in Libya who were saying this, and the reason was...
So what did you think was going to happen when Gaddafi's forces got to Benghazi? Hand flowers to people?
So, you're a human rights advocate, right? Human Rights Watch put out statistics, and in 2 months of fighting in Misrata, about 250 people were killed. In 2 months, 250 people were killed, mainly rebels, right? So that's not a bloodbath, that's a civil war. And that's what was going to happen in Benghazi. Any rebels who were stupid enough to stick around were going to get killed. Most of the rebels were going to flee, and the civilians were going to be left harmless. Gaddafi said this, and he proved it in Misrata. He was not targeting civilians, he was targeting rebels. So this was propaganda, and it was formulated to entice a NATO intervention, and it worked perfectly, and NATO was played for suckers, and we should stop doing that.
Omar, you want to react?
I think that is complete nonsense, and that's the thing. So now we're stuck in a difficult situation where it's unclear what NATO's role ought to be. So we understand that right now we're stuck in this limbo situation, and you can say the intervention may have caused it, but quite frankly, I felt like there was a humanitarian emergency where that actually required intervention at the time. But that's the thing. I think more broadly speaking, we can talk about all these things, all the obstacles that we're seeing as signs that things might not be optimistic, but I think the question we ought to be asking ourselves is, given the certain level of degree of uncertainty that we see in the situation, is what role can we play as an international community to make sure that things progress in a positive direction, that whatever change happens next ends up benefiting progressive forces rather than regressive ones? I think that's the central question, and I think that there are 3 basic elements that have to be pushed forward from here. On the one hand, there cannot be backtracking to the attitudes of the past, where Arab public opinion simply does not matter, and we have this sort of illusory sense of stability that requires us to support certain governments without ever regarding their people in any way. I think seeing millions of people rise up for freedom and democracy is a sign that this time has passed, and we can no longer backtrack to that kind of thinking. On a second level, I think it is the international community's job to continue putting pressure on governments that are using violent repression to keep down positive change from occurring. And third, I think, is there is a need to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well. There has to be a decisive attempt to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine, to end the brutal oppression of Palestinians, because that has been a tool that is exploited by many governments in the region in order to thwart change and to distract people from internal problems. And it's the reason why regimes, for example, like the Syrian regime, still has some level of popularity, is that they're able to say, well, look, okay, maybe we're not very nice to our people, but look at our policy towards Israel. We're standing up for Palestinian rights and so on. That tool has to be taken from them.
If I could go ask David, I mean, what is top of mind, do you think, for Western leaders and political elites? Is it just a rearrangement of the political order in the Arab world to serve Western interests? Okay, all right, Mubarak's gone, okay, Ben Ali's gone, but we have to find a new Mubarak, we have to find a new Ben Ali, maybe with a more kind of semi-democratic face, what makes everyone feel more comfortable. But they just want really allies. And because it's been proven, because Bahrain's out there, I mean, these people protested, but no, geopolitical interest is what's most important at the end of the day, not ideas.
Talk about the international community makes me uncomfortable. There really isn't such a thing. There's a lot of different national interests in competition, and there's no one track. And the talk of intervention also makes me uncomfortable. I mean, we had imperialism all through the 20th century, and it didn't work. It's not a good idea. These people have got to solve their problems by themselves, and I don't believe that putting pressure out of some national interest, as the French do in Tunisia or as the British try to do in Egypt, I don't think this is a good idea. And I think it's a complete disaster if you try and solve the Israeli-Palestinian set to along those lines. The only way it can be done is if they do it together by themselves without the sort of intervention that Obama is trying to bring about.
But you don't have a situation that can resolve itself. You have one party which has control over everything, has a monopoly on power, and is systematically undermining the other people's right to self-determination. They're squeezing them into smaller and smaller cantons. This situation, leaving it escalate will produce...
Alan, I noticed that you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just... I think Omar's aspirations and his policy prescriptions, in principle, are fine. But the problem is, again, they're overly simplistic. He keeps talking about how, we have to accept what the people of these countries want. There isn't one people in these countries. In Bahrain, they're terribly divided between Sunni and Shiite. Similarly, in Syria, they're terribly divided between Kurd, Sunni, Alawite. And he talks about how we have to give rights and representation to the Palestinian people. Which Palestinian people? The people who support Hamas or the people who support Fatah? So, I mean, they're terribly divided. If they could unite, I take you a bet these situations would probably be solved a lot more quickly.
No, I think,
and that's why we see the one real success so far is Tunisia, where it seems that people were united, right? But in these other countries, they're not. And so we have to be very, very careful about what we ask for. We asked for democratic elections in Palestine, and what did we get? We got a Hamas victory. And that's not good for the Palestinian people. It's not good for stability, and it's not good for the U.S. national interest. So we have to be careful. That's why I advocate evolution, gradual evolution, not these revolutions. That's what leads to chaos.
Okay, Omar, I'm going to give you the last word. You got the last word. Go ahead.
You had elections in Israel that also produced a right-wing coalition government that basically is completely incompatible with the idea of resolving the problems of the region or reaching any kind of peace agreement. These complexities of, these people are divided here and there is a way to distract. It's a way to distract from the central theme, which is that people deserve their freedom. And I don't care about the division between Hamas and Fatah and this faction and that faction. The occupation has to end. There are simple things that we can all agree on, regardless of these minor divisions that people try to distract us with. Same thing with Arab countries where there are divisions.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to have to jump in here. We've run out of time. And we haven't resolved anything as usual. Many thanks to my guests today in Florence, Austin, and in Washington. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here on RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.